Hey, and welcome everyone back to Nx show. It has been a while. We want to bring back the show for sure. So we hope to make it a bit more regular again. But today we have a very special edition, specifically about Lerna. So a lot of people have asked us questions about how does Nx compare to Lerna? How do the two match together? How can you use both? When should you use which one? So today is basically the best time to pose your questions. And I'm joined by a fantastic panel today. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves? So let's start with Ben.
Hey everyone. I'm Ben. I'm on the NX core team. I also work with Lerna and did the website basically. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
James, why don't you go next?
Cool. Hi, I'm James. I've been working with Nrwl since December 2017, long time, and been working on NX since that time, and now very excited to help with developing Lerna and taking it forward. Been using Lerna since even longer than that, I think. So it's definitely a very exciting and cool challenge to merge the two tools together in a much more direct way. I've been using them together on different monorepos for a very long time, but now that we have more of a cohesion directly, there's new possibilities. So very exciting.
Cool. Victor?
All right, so I'm Victor. I'm one of the co-founders of Nrwl, and I'm the main sort of the main person behind NX Cloud, right? I also was on the Angular team prior to founding Nrwl, so I have a lot of experience of working on open source stuff.
Cool. Austin?
Yeah, I'm Austin Faisal. I'm new here at Nrwl, just started this month, and I've been working almost exclusively on Lerna since I got here. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm excited to share.
Nice. Not even 1 month in and already in a live stream.
Yep.
Full immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm Yuri. I'm the director of developer experience here at Nrwl. So I'm usually the one that stalks you on Twitter whenever NX or something is mentioned there. All right, so I guess like to kick it off for those that don't know about Lerna or maybe just have heard about it, like have never really used it. So what is Lerna? So can someone jump into that? Maybe James.
Yeah, Lerna is, for me, it was my introduction to monorepos in the JavaScript ecosystem. I think that is the case for many people. You could classify it as the original monorepo tool in our industry. And it's provided functionality around all the different things you would need for managing multiple packages in a single repository. So naturally, that involves publishing to a registry like NPM. It involves being able to link your different packages together because naturally, you could, in theory, have a monorepo of packages which have no relationship whatsoever, but it is kind of more common to have packages that use each other, depend on each other. And so some kind of reconciliation before the package managers themselves had any knowledge of multiple packages and doing an installation across them. Lerna provided capabilities to bootstrap your repository so that they could understand each other, link each other. You also need to be able to run tasks. So you need to be able to build all your projects, test them all, things like that. So Lerna provides capabilities around task running in multiple packages. And when you do those releases, when you version something, when you publish it, we have tooling around all of that. And generating changelog information from those versions that change is provided as well. So all the kind of things that you want around versioning and publishing are provided. And it's had those capabilities for a very long time. Some of those capabilities, like I say, they had their beginnings because there was a complete gap. But the package managers these days support workspaces. So there's an interesting evolution that's happening around multiple packages in a single repository at the package management level. And we'll hear a bit more today around how Lerna can lean on other tools for the task management stuff, the task running stuff. So I would really say that today Lerna's special sauce is in the versioning and publishing. That's the core reason why I personally, for example, still very much use it alongside NX. Naturally, you'd expect, having been working on NX for so long, I use NX whenever I am running any kind of repo, never mind a monorepo. But when I run NX in a monorepo, I still want Lerna in the mix if I'm publishing packages, because it gives me that tooling to do versioning and publishing so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one thing people might also kind of ask themselves, right, is like, we are on the NX show, like hosted by Nrwl. So why are we actually talking about Lerna? We've been tweeting and kind of being loud quite a lot about it, right? But like some people might not have followed along like closely on all the announcements that have been there. It's like Lerna, for some, that like it sometimes it looked like Lerna has been unmaintained or kind of dead, right? So maybe Victor, you can give us some insights of what happened on that side.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I will start with just saying that in general, open source is it's very demanding, right? Working on open source, especially if you're working on sort of like a very popular and ambitious project like Lerna, right? So my experience on the Angular team and on Next team sort of show that unless you have a core team basically who can support each other, etc., right, and can work on this stuff basically every week, it gets very stressful, right? Because everyone depends on it, everyone is opening issues, essentially sort of criticizing your project or demanding things from you, and you're always sort of overwhelmed, right? So that's just the state of open source. It's very hard, right? Not many can do it well. So if you want to just at some point say, hey, I'm done with this project and I want to just do something else, right? I moved on, right? I want to work on another thing, right? You cannot do it unless you have a team, right? That's supposed to, or the project will die. So Daniel, who did, I think, a very good job maintaining the project overall, right? He just didn't have the bandwidth to keep doing it, right? Because he has other things he wanted to do, right? And it's absolutely reasonable, right? Everyone moves from project to project at some point, right? So for the last 2 years, Lerna hasn't received a lot of updates because it's a lot of time that has to be spent to keep this project going, right? So finally, in May of this year, right, after these 2 years of kind of low maintenance, right, he basically said it's unmaintained, right? So he's moving on, right? So we thought about it, and Jeff in particular, which is the other co-founder of Nrwl, right? And we thought about it. Lerna does a lot of stuff that's really cool. Like, people love it. The big community of folks using Lerna, right? And I think what Lerna lacks is not the cool stuff that it does a lot of cool stuff, right? It needs some work, etc. But what it needs is a core team and a few folks who can work on it, put hours, put energy in, fix bugs, see through features, like write good docs, which is true about any project, right? Lerna has a good idea, a good community, people love it. It just needs more effort put in to make it, what people would use today. And part of it is that what is okay for an open source project, right, has changed in the last 5 years, right? Right now, people who go to like a build system expect like a fancy sites and videos, walkthroughs, like high quality stuff, right? So like it's no longer like okay to just have a README with some, hey, you can just check out those things. No, people like really want to see a very high level of execution, not just in the project itself, but in supporting materials, right? Which is the docs, the content, and everything, right? And it's very hard. It's impossible to do just being a single person. Well, it's very, very challenging, right? So we have the team who can do it, right? We've been doing open source for many years. I don't know. I personally did it for 15 years, something like that. But 10 years if you include Google and Nx, which is like large open source projects used by millions of people, right? So we have a strong team. We know how to do it all, right? Not just the code, but the community grows, the other stuff, the docs, generating excitement, organizing events, etc. Right? So we thought we would be a good fit, right? And we asked Daniel if he would like us to take over the stewardship, because I think from the non-big tech teams, okay, there are strong, build tools teams at Google, Facebook, etc. Right? But outside of those companies, I feel like we're probably the best team to work on JavaScript build tools, right? With our experience. And he said, yeah, because basically the choices were the project dies, right? Because he ran out of energy, basically, right? Which is absolutely fine, right? Or we try to move it forward, right? And I think it's better for the project if we move forward.
Yeah, I think it made a lot of sense for us kind of to go into that area, right? Because as you mentioned, we have a lot of experience there. And also like personally, I feel like, and I can totally feel what Daniel mentioned. Like he was recently on the DevTools FM channel as well, where he talked about much more about the whole story behind Lerna, how he got into the project, like the burden of like keeping it going, right? Like initially, I think he was even baked by a company, but at some point you do it in free time, you change companies. So I think that is a big plus for Nrwl at this point, right? Because similar to NX, right? We can work on NX in our work time, right? So we don't have to do it on Sundays. You can, of course, right? If you like and love it, but like you don't have to, right? And that takes away a lot of the burden, I feel, from open source in Java.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in general the whole Sunday open source thing, it works really well either if your project is small or it's like a short burst of energy. Like, oh, I'll try something out for 2 months. But if you're like for 5 years, you have to spend all your weekends maintaining this project. You're like, maybe not, right? So I get it 100%, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So yeah, as you said, like we initially, I think it was beginning of May when we kind of officially took over stewardship, and we had a blog post about it, like just like explaining a bit like the situation there and like having some links there and how things basically transitioned, and a lot has happened there, right? Until since then. So maybe also you can go into some of more details because you have been working on the team directly on the Lerna repo. So what have been some things that we released with version 5? That was one of the first ones.
Oh, can I also mention one thing before, right? Sure. Is that I want to give just a bit more context of why we decided to I mean, it's a good thing to help in the community, etc., right? But I think it's important for folks to know why Lerna is important to us, right? That I want to provide some assurance of sorts, right? That we're not going to like drop it and like, yeah, we took it, it's a few months in, we're like not interested, right? So for us, it's a strategic project, right? We really believe in it, and so we at Nrwl, so we have large companies who are clients, and we help them use Monorepos as well, right? So a lot of them use Lerna for publishing, sometimes for task running, for other things. So like we experience Lerna, like, and deal with Lerna and work with Lerna, every day, right? All the time, right? A lot of NX users use Lerna for publishing, for example, as James mentioned, right? You can do everything else with just NX, and then you use Lerna to publish packages to your registry to NPM, right? We use Lerna ourselves to publish NX packages to the registry. So it's just like, it's always there. It's in the same area, right? So which we have expertise in, right? Build tools is what we do, right? Monorepo build tools is what we, like just no one else does it, I think, in the JS space as well, or for as long of a time, right? Has the team that is as strong in that area, right? If Lerna was a testing framework, right? Okay, that would have been less of a fit, right? We could have said, like, maybe we could have found some value in that so that we can integrate it well and make it this testing framework part of, our next story or whatever, right? But we don't have the expertise in building testing frameworks, right? So yeah, like, but that wouldn't be a good fit. Whereas for build tools and Monorepo build tools in particular, right? We are a very good fit. It's basically what our team does all the time. That's what our business is built around. We are the ones who put together Monorepo tools, so this is us, right? It's perfect fit, right? There's no other team right now, I think, who is as good of a fit for this type of stuff as us, right? And why we cared about Lerna so much is that I think in general there are sort of two types of Monorepos, and I tweeted about it recently, but I think it's important to understand that there are two main use cases basically in the JS community, right? One is the Lerna style Monorepo, which is you have a bunch of packages stitched together via package.json and node modules, and they know about each other via package.json. You can run tasks across those. Usually there are multiple versions of things because there are multiple node modules, right? You just run PM scripts in all those packages. So usually when you run, say, Jest or Remix or whatever you run in there, right, it runs as if it wasn't even in a Monorepo, right? When the Jest runs or Remix runs, it just runs in its own folder, in its own world, right? And you could easily imagine it running the same stuff outside of that Monorepo if all the dependencies were published to a registry, to NPM, right? It would be very similar. Not identical because some configuration is shared or whatever, but similar. You can squint and like it looks very similar, right? And So that's sort of the one use case, right? Which I call the Lerna style monorepo, right? Because Lerna was the first major JavaScript project that made this style popular, right? Lerna style monorepos are huge in the JavaScript community. You can use Lerna, obviously, to do it. The name is in there, right? You can use Yarn workspaces with some extra stuff to do it well, right? For example, you can use Nx without plugins, just Nx core to do. You can use like Lage or Rush.js. There are a bunch of projects that do that style of monorepos well, and Lerna is the biggest one by far, I think, right? So people still associate with Lerna very much. That's the first thing that pops up in people's heads usually when they think about that style of monorepos, right? And there is a different style, right? So, which is, I call the Google style, where because Jeff and I came out of Google, we were kind of biased toward that style because we see, like, it's hard to see the benefit of it unless you experience it, truly working at Google, Meta, or Uber, or whatever, right? And there it's different, right? It's similar in the shape. You look at the repo, well, there are projects, right? But they're much more lightweight. They can depend on each other through many different things. Through imports, you don't have to have package.jsons at all. Like, why would you? If you don't, most of the packages in your repo, if they're not published anywhere, like, why define package.json at all? There's a single node modules. It requires a bit more work, a bit more tooling to make the stuff work. But the experience is different. It feels more integrated. You can scale it a lot more easily to thousands of projects, right? And I think in the JavaScript space right now, there are only two things that do it well, which is Bazel, which is more of a niche tool, right, that some companies use, but by and large is not used very much, or Nx with plugins, right? If you use our like Nrwl React, Nrwl Angular, whatever, something like that, you have that style of a monorepo, right? Most monorepos have a bit of in between. I'm not saying it's like clear cut. You cannot have any part of the second one, the first one, but you can see certain bias towards one style or the other one. You see a monorepo, right? So historically speaking, we focused on Google style monorepos the most because we see the value there is being higher. If you adopt it, it's a bit harder to adopt for sure because it's more of a mind shift from what you normally do. But then the gains are very high, and you can grow to a much larger repo, and the maintenance burden is relatively low, right? The Lerna style monorepo we always supported, but we kind of like, okay, so there is, people can use Lerna for that. Like you may not need this, mighty tools that we offer, to drive that style of monorepo. And I think what we kind of realized is that there is a giant community of folks who just okay with Lerna style monorepos, right? They don't need, a 20 million line, like 5,000 projects, depending on the crazy way style repo. They have 50 projects. They're pretty small, right? And like, yeah, for that thing, perhaps the trade-off lean towards the Lerna style monorepo. Maybe it is better, right? So we kind of had that realization. And even though we did support it with Nx, because the core of it is the same. You need to run tasks fast, orchestrate, cache things well, produce beautiful output as you run many, many things in the terminal, etc. Right? Do all of those things. You have to do that. The core is the same, but now you have to have the community, because a lot of open source is not about providing the best tool for the job necessarily. It's about growing a community of folks who are excited a particular way of doing things with a particular tool, right? And growing the community is challenging. So we had the best task orchestrator and the cacher in the JS space, at least, right? I can point to benchmarks and stuff. See the links in the description below, kind of stuff, right? But the community that we had was mainly focused on like, okay, let's fucking build, let's build the biggest, super mightiest monorepo because we can. It will be super fast, right? Well, I mean, Lerna is a perfect fit for us in this case because it, as a giant community, which we have a cool technology that we can put inside and make that community much happier very quickly, right? So in general, I think there is a lot of value in sticking with existing tools. Like JavaScript community is very kind of new thing, happy. It's like, oh, there is this new tool, oh, jump on it. It has 300 likes, right? But really, there is a lot of value in sticking with things that's been around for 10 years. If that has been around for 10 years, it will probably be around for a lot more. It just stats-wise, new projects die very quickly, right? That thing's been around for many years. As 1 million people using it, what it needs is really, and we'll talk about it later, is a modernization of docs, guides, and a few strategic things that need to be put in place to make it suddenly not just on par with other tools, right, but better, right? And again, we might talk about it later, right? And then the competitors. So we thought that we have something and we can just, make it a lot better fairly quickly for a lot of people, right? And it would, help us, right, to reach that giant community that right now care about a particular way of developing, which we historically, right, we didn't talk to that community very much. We build our own community, right?
Yeah, I think like in general, this helps a lot. Like, I think it's good that you brought up the term, and we will have like some content to support this as well, like the term like Google style versus learner style, or whatever term we might want to use to communicate it more. Because like, there is a lot of confusion among people, especially when they look at Nx, and that's potentially also our fault, as we said, right? Like that we promote that setup a lot because we see the whole benefit behind it. A lot of people think like you just can go with the full setup, right? Plugins and everything, and like, and a lot just want to have like that more lightweight setup, which was always supported, but now it's also a better way for us to communicate that to the community, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also the benefit, obviously, of incremental adoption, right? Like you can much easily like just plug it in on existing repos and then go from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, let's circle back to Lerna and some of the news about the release. Also, we were mentioning before, like when we took over the stewardship of Lerna, obviously there was a lot of work to do on the repo itself, a lot of issues, unmanaged PRs and stuff. So can you talk a bit about that and like what we did there?
Yeah. So our first order of business right afterwards was Lerna version 5. You saw released end of May. And that was primarily to get things updated. The project hadn't had a lot of activity in the past, as previously mentioned, and so there was a lot of work to be done, like get it on the latest LTS node versions, right? Fix potential issues that came up in like NPM audit, stuff like that. So that was kind of the first thing that was done, end of May. And so right afterwards, we came out with version 5.1. And that has the addition of probably our first new feature since we took it over, use Nx. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Maybe Victor will talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But adding that task runner capability that Victor was talking about as an option for Lerna. And then we've had some smaller versions since then as well, patch versions where we are taking in issues and pull requests that have been outstanding in the community for a long time that just make sense to merge, fix long-standing issues, just get the project back up to standards for a good, well-maintained open source project, right? And so that's where we're at right now. And there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of open issues, lots of open pull requests, but we're getting there. And it'll be a slow process, but that's what we're working on right now. And cool. Along with that is we're also adding a new suite of tests to the Lerna repo, end-to-end tests that will give us even more confidence that Lerna will continue to function the way that we need it to and the way that it has as we make these updates. So that's one of our big initiatives as well.
Cool. Yeah, there has also been quite some, as you mentioned, quite some just infrastructure work, which is not like visible outside, right? Package upgrades and all that stuff, or end-to-end that's set up. Like it takes some time to clean up stuff, but it will help us like move much quicker from here on, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that is pretty visible is also something that we launched quite recently, right? Is an update to the Lerna website. So Ben is our man for that. Like he's the one that designed it, set it up, made sure we can deploy it. So Ben, can you talk about it? Like what do we use for it? Like how do we set it up? What was the experience there? So
Yeah, sure. So concerning the documentation website, we wanted to refresh it a bit and make sure it was more actual than it was before. Before it was like a single page with all the information about Lerna in it right away. And we want to add more information about Lerna itself, but also how to use it, some guides and everything. So we had multiple ideas on what to use, like solution available for it. We tested a few of them internally, but we finally went with a solution called Docusaurus, which is well known. And we wanted to have something that is open source, obviously, that is easy to handle and maintain, and that is simple to contribute to, because Lerna is an open source project and we expect people to contribute to Lerna, but also to make the website better as well. And Docusaurus was kind of the best out there because it has like a large community, a really good documentation because of that community. Like there is a lot of users. And it powers most of the open source project, which is like kind of neat. It also has a lot of plugins to enhance and customize the website experience itself, like search or changing some kind of layout shift or anything like that. Translations. Then we created a new homepage with the relevant information that we wanted to put in front of people, like the new features that we developed in the latest Lerna releases. And also what was the main thing to promote, and also what color to use, all that. We also plan to improve the website over time and adding more features and content.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, one big part was also the whole like rewriting of the guides, right? Like we invested quite some time also to dive more deeper into that, and whoever has ever written like guides and docs and stuff knows how difficult that can be, right? So a lot of the stuff has been already there, right? There were a lot of readmes embedded into the GitHub repo of Lerna already, and they are still there. So we created new guides, heavily inspired by the existing readmes, try to simplify stuff, and we will continue also to kind of clean that up, right? Point maybe direct to the website rather than having all the readmes in the repo itself. Cool. Another thing I wanted to address specifically is, and a lot of people ask about, like, what is so special, like in Lerna, especially in the 5.1 release, right? So we already mentioned initially that when we saw Lerna kind of going into more like deprecation mode and stuff already 2 years ago, we prepared Nx for it. So Nx was able already back then to work alongside Lerna, integrate into Lerna. So what is so special about 5.1 release? What did we do there now that we have also like stewardship of Lerna?
All right. So yeah, I can talk about it. I want to make it very clear that there are a lot of things happening, and what I'm going to talk about is not the only thing, right? So in general, like we already mentioned a few, right? Bringing the repo in a good shape, maintenance, right? Which is a giant effort. It would take many months, and it's a lot of work, right? To open source is very hard, right? Removing some outdated features, like modernizing some stuff, like docs, etc. You know, things like that. There is a lot going on. So for folks who be like, oh, I know you're just going to do, you know, put an X inside, etc. No, like it's like there's a lot of things that we are doing. This is just one part of it, and you know, so now I'm going to talk about this part, which is just one part, but it's an important part. All right. So what we're essentially what we are trying to do, right, is to say that Lerna and like Nx is very good at task running, and I will talk about it more in a second, right? And Lerna currently, or like prior to 5.1, right? Prior to 5.1, use two libraries for task running, PMAP, PQ, and you, depending on whether you sort or not, would go and use one or the other. Those external libraries, right? So two external libraries. So Nx becomes a third external library you can use to run tasks, right? So it's not swapping anything, right? There are already two ways to do it, right? It's a third way, right? And what it essentially allows us to do is to say that if you run a Lerna run command, like Lerna run test, you can filter, you know, things, you know, select a subset of projects or whatever, right? Figure out flags and stuff, right? But whatever you're running that command, Lerna can, you know, get this information and say, hey, you know, I need to run these scripts with these params against these projects instead of using PQ, Nx do it, right? And so in terms of integration itself, it's actually a very small integration. You can look at the PR, like kind of 30 lines of code, something like that, right? Because again, as you mentioned, on the Nx side, we prepare to be integrated into other things, right? So we did a lot of rework, etc., to make it easy. Simply require an Nx, like in your JavaScript file, just say, I would like to run those things, do. All right, and Nx will just do it, require no configuration from your repo at all. Just like figure it out and do it, right? So a lot of prep was done on the Nx side. On the Lerna side, integration was trivial, right? So the harder part was preparing Nx to do that, right? So, but now what happens is that if you set use Nx property to true in your Lerna.json, Nx will run those tasks for you instead of PQ or PMAP, right? So why is it cool, right? First, NX will be able to parallelize things really well on one machine, very efficiently, can do computation caching, meaning that if it ran something before, it would know that it did it, so instead of running it, will restore from cache, right? So it won't rerun things. That doesn't need to. And NX is very, very good at this. And as a result, right now, Lerna is basically just as good at this, right? Which is a cool thing, that you don't have to configure anything. Lerna is not starting from scratch. It immediately goes to like basically being the best at that, right? I have a benchmark, which was, it made some, splash, and some people were unhappy or whatever. But overall, the benchmark dissected, clone it, run it, try to find something that is not about it if you don't trust it, right? But it compares, Lerna Nx and a bunch of other tools like Monorepos, etc., right? To see what is faster at, for example, restoring cached artifacts, right? If you run something, the tool like Lerna right now can figure out, what you're trying to run. To figure it out, it needs to look at all the relevant source files, a bunch of other info, compute some value, and then match it in its cache and see, have I computed that exact thing before? Oh, I have, restore it from cache, or I have not. Okay, run the thing, right? That figuring out can take time if you have a large repo. Right? It's still computation, right? So you're swapping the idea that you're swapping a longer computation for a short, right? And so Nx and Lerna are very good at that. Right, you can see that in that benchmark, Lerna is like 5 times faster, or 5.3 times faster, I think, than Monorepos, for example. Right, so it's very fast, right, at that thing, and in general, at like orchestrating things and running things very efficiently, right, minimizing idle time, not running things you don't need to run, etc. Right, so it's actually kind of crazy that for the last 2 years, every build tool would had a guide. Lerna from migrating from Lerna 2, right? We had the same, right? And the idea was that, well, if you want to be fast, like if you have a Lerna repo, you follow these 10 steps, So now basically you can just stick with Lerna, do nothing, enable a Boolean flag, really, and you will be faster than those competing tools, right? I just find it, I don't know, there is something about that is cool, that don't rewrite stuff. Like, attend to older open source projects, revitalize them, right? And they'll be amazing, right? Like, a lot of this stuff we rely on, been around for many years, and it's a good thing, right? So that's one thing, it's just super fast, right?
And nothing about your other experiences with Lerna change in any way by enabling that flag. It's exclusively the task running. Nothing else is delegated in any way. It's still Lerna version, Lerna publish, Lerna bootstrap. All of those commands are exactly the same.
Your repo remains exactly the same. The commands are exactly the same, right? So you basically have, it's like, imagine back in the day, you would have a JavaScript engine that doesn't use JIT. Right, it just evaluated stuff, right, in a very basic way. It was slow, and then JIT showed up, right, and made it, 100 times faster, right? But your program still runs; they just happen to be faster, right? There's the same idea that something underneath is a lot faster now, but you, as a user of the repo, are not affected, apart from being happy, right? But everything else works the same way. So it's worth thinking about it as in a similar kind of fashion, right, where it's like replacing an implementation of an engine, right? But the outer layer is the same, right? So your experience is the same, you run same commands, your repos work same way, right? That's one. The second part, in addition to this replacement, there are more capabilities that now available. For example, Lerna scripts right now can depend on each other, right? You can have what people refer to as build pipelines, right? Or like dependencies between targets, where you can say, oh, for me to run my build, I need to run pre-build, or for me to run my test, I need to build all my dependencies. You can express those type of things right now very easily. And when you run that, Lerna via Nx in combination will figure out what to run. It could run a mix of those scripts in the most efficient way, right? So you have this, this extra killer feature, which is very useful. So if you see something in your CI where you do like Lerna run build, and then Lerna run test because test perhaps require build, or Lerna run build, Lerna run end-to-end because end-to-end requires build. Those two commands shouldn't be next to each other, right? Really, end-to-end should have a dependency on build expressed in this fashion, such that, anytime you run end-to-end, if something hasn't been built, it will be built, right? So that works now. Terminal output, like if you run test for 50 projects, for pretty much any build system out there, the result is nightmare. It's just text just flat, just scrolling, like megabytes of text passing by. It's unusable, right? So James, who is in the person with the guitar and the piano, a very musical person, also redid the terminal output for Nx some time ago, and it's beautiful, right? So I really forget about the fast part. If you just run a thing that builds 30 things, and you see something that's dynamic, compact, shows relevant information only, it's just easy to grasp as a human being when you run a token. You're like, okay, I see this project failed, but the rest is okay. Comparing to like everything is just like, oh, that was an error. You're just quickly scrolling up, trying to catch that error, right? That thing alone.
People totally underestimate that, right? But like in the end, if you think like how long and how often you look at that terminal output throughout the day, right, it makes a lot of sense to just see whatever you need to see at this specific moment, right?
Exactly. Like never scroll up kind of stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that thing, Lerna just gets it for free now. It just is there. Works really well, all right? And the most important thing, which no one appreciates until they try, it's one of those things that until you try it, you're like, it doesn't matter. I would say it's like iOS for an Android user, right? iOS is garbage. The first to try it, like, oh, actually, I see what's going on, right? So it's the same. I have the same feeling. That's what's happening. And it's people right now be posting like, you hate Android, blah, 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 this and that. But it's distribution, right? And distribution, where right now, if you run Lerna run, I don't know, build or something, right? And let's say build depends on other builds and pre-builds. It's just a whole thing that things of scripts that have to run in a particular order because further scripts can depend on the result running of the previous script, things like that, right? And it's like, it's hard, the whole graph. Distributing this is very hard, right? No other tool except Nx and Lerna, right now, two of them, can do it in a sort of broader community. Bazel can do it, but Bazel is a niche too, kind of hard to set up, so folks don't usually like. If you can make Bazel work, like good for you, right? So, but most folks just can't. The cost is too high, right? But now you can run any command and just say, make it fast, right? While preserving the dev ergonomics of running it on a single machine and while providing close to no configuration, right? Regarding this, no configuration, you say make it fast, and it becomes fast, right? That is a key feature that is. It's harder to build than everything else combined timestamp, right? It's very hard to build, but it's the key capability, right? That now when you run it, you have a beautiful output as if everything happened on one machine, but actually happened on 50 machines. We have a repo which we probably link in the description where we have a Lerna repo where CI takes them like 6 hours. A big repo, like a normal size enterprise repo, right? And we enable distribution and just dial the number of agents we want to use to run every CI, a bit more, and we can see the CI the worst case CI just goes from 6 hours to like half an hour to 15 minutes. We can note without us doing very much, just basically allocating more machines in a very, very declarative way, by basically changing one number right in one place. And it's very hard to convey why it is much cooler than spawning 3 Jenkins things on the side, right? We'll talk a lot about it, why it is much better, and we write a lot about it. But that's a key feature right now where there is basically no one except Nx. So Lerna and Nx are the only 2 things that can do that without you having to have like a dedicated team of engineers maintaining your Bazel setup, all right? And that's super cool. I know that most majority of people who listen to this will be like, cool, I don't think I need it. That's the reaction everyone has. I can distribute myself, etc. It happens. But if you, just try it out, right? Just build a sample project, look at that repo and see, oh, that was easy, right? You'll see like time and time again, once you enable this model of distribution, your CI configuration shrinks like tenfold. Because a lot of your CI config is trying to manage distribution in some fashion. Managing machines, trying to think. You don't have to do it anymore. It's done for you, right? Your CI configuration shrinks tenfold, and it becomes faster, right? In addition. So it's like, it's simpler and faster. There is no really a trade-off for the distribution against like distributing yourself, right? Distributing yourself is worse in every single way, right? But this one requires, it's like, again, JIT and evaluation. And there is a bit of a trade-off. But most of the time, right? Like for 99% of applications, JIT is better. You actually want to, like just better for most use cases. It's the same here. You might come up with some use case where it's not necessarily better, but for vast majority of repos, so like even for relatively small repos, right? This way of distributing is just, it's incomparably better, right?
As well as your CI config shrinking massively, it also becomes something you no longer need to keep updating.
Yeah, exactly.
When you change your tasks in your repo by changing project JSONs or package JSONs, doesn't matter where the configuration is coming from, you're altering that dependencies between those tasks. you now need to make a corresponding change in your CI YAML file.
Yeah.
That's not the case with Lerna or with NX when it's distributed. You're just throwing stuff at the engine inside and letting it figure out how to sprinkle them around the machine.
Exactly.
So you no longer need to update your CI when you change the construction of your repo.
That's exactly right. You can add new projects, reshuffle things, split your test suites, and it will rebalance it, such as utilization of your agent is perfect. Move the files from one machine to another one. Absolutely transparently behind the scenes, nothing is required from you, right? And I know it's kind of hard to see why this is awesome unless you tried it, but it is like a really game changer, especially for like repo that is slightly bigger, right? Where it's like, okay, the CI is taking a few hours on a single machine, so you have to distribute for sure. And doing that is a game changer, right? So the fact that like any Lerna repo right now can turn it on and benefit now from computation caching and from this distribution without having to do anything, without adopting another tool, really, without like just by flipping a Boolean flag from false to true, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I was about to say, like as James said, like the simplicity is like really what appeals the most at the first moment, right? Because there's so much knowledge like behind the scenes, like what like the DT distribution does, like even taking account historical data, and obviously by having the project graph, it knows also best how to distribute things. And whoever has ever worked on some CI, and you always at some point have to do some sort of distribution, right? And that's usually a very naive one, right? Because you just like divide it in batches, right? Exactly, and just distribute it on agents, but there's always the same badges, right? Which is not ideal in terms of computation and stuff.
Exactly.
One thing I also wanted to clarify, like if you like right now switch to Lerna 5.1 and you use NX and set that to true, what you basically have to do is just to install the NX package, right? And NX that package is open source, MIT licensed. So a lot of people are like, but now if I buy into NX, like if I have an existing Lerna workspace, can I actually use NX, right? Can I set that flag to true? Can I install a package? Is it like working with my existing corporate guidelines? Stuff, right?
That's a very good point, actually. NX from the beginning was MIT licensed. Was always, everything was done in the open. It's like that's just what we believe in at the company, that simple licensing, you can fork it if you want to, right? In opposite to some other open source, like currently open source projects, we never close source, it was always there. You could always see, so it's part of what we believe in, right? So MIT, like NX has MIT licensed, right? So you can add it. In addition to just the licensing part of it, which is, it's just an open source project, right? We just happen to be a team of people who works on it, right? But there are other people who work on it as well, right? So it's just an open source project, right? Just well maintained, right? With a strong team behind it. So I think if anything, it's a plus that there is a team whose livelihood depends on this project working well. So we spend our time making it work well, right? It's not a hobby; it is a job for every single member of the team, because like our business is built on making this project succeed, right? So, and it's been around for 5 years. It's succeeding, so it's not a risky move on this, right? Secondly, as a small, people may not care, but the NX also is a relatively small, like not modules, like in terms of file size, right? So it's still like a 5 gigabytes of things is coming. It's like 10 megabytes, something like that. That's what an unpacked, untarred NX is, which is much smaller, for example, than Lerna, right? So if you're worried about, oh, my node module is already bloated, etc., okay, you won't notice NX being added there, right? It's very small.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and with that, so usually that is kind of no-brainer, right? Like you just get faster local execution, better task scheduling, and also local caching, right? Now, obviously, if you add like the distribution on top of it, and then the distributed task execution and distributed cache, which you mentioned before, that is powered by NX Cloud, right? And the plus point here is like if you have an open source project, and if some open source maintainers are looking at the stream right now, like that is completely free for open source. So that's also because like our contribution is Nrwl to the open source world, right? So we give you free access to the basically NX Cloud distribution, which is very good occasion also, I feel like, for trying it out and playing around with it, seeing like how it performs. And some might actually benefit quite a lot. Because like if you look out there, a lot of repositories, open source repos are using NX, and like a whole lot are also using Lerna. And so basically now both of those can basically benefit. Right?
We have some stats actually on the public, because NX Cloud in general is free for most projects, and it's completely free in unlimited fashion for open source projects, right? it's non-free for if you want to run it on-prem. So that's how we generally make money. So it's free for most people, but if you're like a bank running your own Kubernetes cluster with an Nx Cloud, well, then someone has to pay for it, right? So you will be the one, right? So, but for everyone else, you should be able to use it. Don't worry about it, right? So what I want to say that based on the public cloud knowledge, so not on-prem. On-prem, the savings are crazy, and it's right in immense amount of value. But for the public version, when we look at the savings that like the smartness of an Nx and an Nx Cloud gives you, we save about 80% of computation. So meaning that if you right now imagine your CI and you say you're running, I don't know, 1,000 hours of computation per month, right, to run your CI, well, on average project would save 800 hours of that. And for depending on your setup, it can be more than that. An Nx repo itself saves more than that, a lot more, right? But it really depends, right? So I mean that your amount of compute you do will shrink by 5 times, right? So it will be a lot less compute. In addition to that, like if you had 1,000 hours before, now you have 200 hours. Like the new intelligence of like orchestrating things better, distributing, that computation will actually take less clock time. So it's less computation overall, but also even those 200 hours would be faster with this stuff turned on than it would have been the same 200 hours without it, because we just utilize things better. Right? We split the work better. We make sure no agent is idle in CI, etc. Things like that, right? So there are kind of two components to the fastness in here, right? We just don't compute a lot of stuff because it has been computed before. We just know it, right? And we, are able to compute what we need to compute in a better way, in a most efficient way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is also a good point, like to talk about, like now we have talked basically about how Nx can be used in a simple setup, right, without plugins in that more Lerna style repository. Now, obviously that we have stewardship of both of the things, we can integrate them much better. Now, the question that might come up is like, how should I use them now together, right? Like one person in the stream asked, like, okay, I was starting with Monorepos, like with Nx, right? I know kind of Lerna as well. Like, how can I integrate both of them? Does it make sense, or can I use features from Lerna within Nx, vice versa? We have heard some of those, right? Oh, in general, I feel like this question even goes broader to some sense. Like, when would you go with which approach, starting, for instance, a new project, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So I've been using the two of them together for a very, very long time. Literally the last few years, way before any talks of potentially Nrwl taking over stewardship of the project. So had no vested interest in Lerna. It gave me functionality that I needed as a user. So you can have a look at, for example, TypeScript ESLint, Angular ESLint, two projects that I created that are very heavily used and contributed to, that both use Nx and Lerna. And so for me, obviously, as somebody very experienced with Nx will always be the thing that I reach for any repo of any size, because I am intimately familiar with the extreme benefits that I get from using it as a tool, code generation, all these kind of things that aren't even relevant to this discussion. Nx gives me that are optional features of Nx, but I get great power from them. In terms of other people approaching it cold, I think Victor's touched on the distinction between different types of monorepos. So you might want to consider, are you just producing a series of functional packages that provide some capabilities that you're publishing to a registry that might steer you towards the traditional Lerna style, potentially? If you're going to be building different types of projects that are co-located together and might depend on each other, Nx gives you an awful lot of capabilities around modern frameworks, testing utilities, stuff like that, that just gets you up to speed so fast and gets you a load of extra superpowers when it comes to scaffolding projects and stuff like that. But in terms of stuff that still very much differentiates Lerna, and why have I been using them together all this time? It's the versioning and publishing capabilities that I mentioned. So even though I'm using Nx to get its advanced capabilities around understanding my project graph and target graph, I still want Lerna to give me a command where I can say, okay, so for all of these Angular ESLint packages, for example, like the builder, the schematics, the plugins for ESLint that I publish, I want to version them. In my case, I want to version them together. So I want them all to have exactly the same version. I want to understand the commits that I've merged in since the last time I did a release, and I want to generate a change log based off of that. I want to push that up to GitHub. I want to tag the repo. I want to generate release notes that, as well as the changelog markdown file. I want to have them on the releases tab of GitHub. And I want to publish to the registry. And I want to do all of that in a very seamless way with just 2 commands. So those are the capabilities that Lerna gives me over and above NX and all the great stuff that it gives. So you can have a look at those. And obviously, very recently, the NX repo itself moved away from its custom publishing utilities, which we've always had, to using Lerna so that we can dog food it in a very direct way. So that's also very beneficial. So we've got a very nice relationship where Lerna is using NX and NX is using Lerna. And so we're always making sure that the 2 tools work together. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds nice. Cool. I think one thing that we didn't touch on yet is like, what are the plans going forward, right? I think like we published a roadmap directly on the Lerna repository, right? Yeah. Maybe we can talk a bit about like, right now we have done already quite a lot of stuff, right? Like what is like the next till the end of the year? Do we have already kind of some rough plan of where to go?
Yeah. So I'll give us a little bit of context. In general, I think of roadmaps more as themes. Right? So as people on the team know, like, okay, let's come up with 3 themes for this year, right? And just work in those themes. And the main reason is that a lot of stuff changes, right? Especially at this point for us, right? Where, like, for example, with NX, we've been working for many years, so we can, okay, you know, there is more concrete stuff that we wanted to do. With Lerna, it's a bit harder for us to come up with like 20 concrete items we need to do right away, right? Because, you know, we're still figuring out what is the most important thing to do, etc. Right? So the themes, I will talk just about the themes. One is making it a really like well-maintained open source project. Maintenance is hard. You know, we know how hard it is to maintain stuff when new issues pile up, new PRs, etc. Right? So I know people may not be super excited about it, like, oh, it's not the hottest 5 features or whatever, but it matters if the project is well maintained, that if you open an issue, someone will notice it and will address it, right? So at the end of the day, that is why it is an open source project, that you are able to communicate with the team, right, in some fashion. So that's what we are doing right now, is figuring out an efficient way for the folks to provide feedback. And for this to work well, we need to have a repo that's well maintained, right? Which means deprecating some older issues, carefully seeing what still matters, what not, etc. It's a lot of work, right? As a side note, we have a Slack channel now, which is a community Slack channel. People can go and talk to us, and we can answer questions. So that communication is very important, so you don't feel lost as a user, right? You're always there, right? You know, close to the core team, right? And if you ask something, well, someone will help you, right? That's one. The second thing is removing some outdated parts of Lerna, right? There are some things that I'm not sure it's worth keeping, right? We can, you know, go as time progresses, we will see what can be revitalized and what can be removed. For example, things like Lerna create, right? Where you can create basically an empty package, right? But it's like a kind of scaffold. Doesn't really work for most people. The time moved on. Whatever generates right now is not what I would generate, right? So things like that. So things like that. Do we need to keep them? In NX, for example, we have this pluggable thing where, because we have this super duper generation framework with a virtual file system, right, and compatibility, etc. You can say, oh, I would like to generate a React library. Here's a bunch of recipes. We call them generators, right? Pick one, play with them. VS Code will give you a preview. Okay, that is useful because then you can tweak it to what exactly you need, right? It doesn't generate 2 files that you may not need, right? So should you just use that instead, right? Because that is legitimately useful, because you pick exactly what you need and will generate that, right? Instead of having like a, you know, kind of, you know, something that is not exactly what you need, right? The third part, the third theme, right? The third theme is modernizing some parts of Lerna, which includes, you know, the docs, and, you know, things like task running, etc. So the idea is that in the new docs, I think, are fantastic, and the site is good, and the guides are legit, right? Is that if you're someone who is going to use Lerna right now, right, and you compare it to something else, you'll be like, okay, comparing to a, you know, like, let's pick something else like Moon. Moon is another tool that builds stuff that is recently, it's a very new, right? And like, should I use Lerna or Moon, right? And you look at them side by side. you should feel like both, well maintained, and modern, have good docs, high quality. Like, because at the end of the day, an open source project is a product, right? You want to consume it in a delightful way and be like, okay, that's good, I like it, right? So that modernizing part is what we also put in a lot of effort, the third theme, right? So bringing the ship in a good shape and making sure that right now, I think we already made a lot of progress. Right? We worked really hard in the last month and a bit to get the new site out, etc. But maybe by end of summer, right, the maintenance will be in a better shape, and you will see more content and more other parts will be put in the right place. We were like, okay, I see now. It is like a beautiful product with a strong core team. A lot of people put effort into it, right? It's modern, right? It looks like it was built by a strong team today, right? So if someone built a new project today with a strong team, right, they would do something like that, right? So those are the themes, right? As folks mentioned, publishing in terms of features and bug fixing is probably the highest priority right now. So general workflows regarding publishing is what we look at, when it comes to adding new features, fixing bugs, because that is the part where Lerna is ahead of everything else, I think, right? And we want to make sure it remains ahead, right? So, a lot of stuff in that area, right, will be improved and stuff, right?
Cool. Sounds good. All right. I guess we are already kind of towards the end of our stream. What I also wanted to bring up, like, feel free to reach out, like also open source projects that are currently using Lerna. Maybe you are still in version 4. We actually saw a surprising high number or immediately upgrading to 5, right? Yeah. So it looked like it's no brainer. We didn't like get a lot of like feedback or broken things from there. Also, that was kind of planned, right? There's no huge breaking changes in there. But definitely, if you
it's still kind of incredible because some of the things we had to patch to make it okay. Modern are these undocumented low-level npm utility packages that npm themselves don't document. So it was a wild ride, and so it's kind of a miracle that we haven't been getting reports of everything's broken.
Yeah. Cool, but yeah, definitely reach out to us. You can reach us directly on the NX DevTools channel. Obviously, ping us directly on our Twitter handles. We also have a YouTube channel where you will be seeing like lots and lots more content, also around Lerna, integration of the two. Also this thing which we mentioned initially, like Google style and Lerna style kind of approaches. So we'll be much more content about like how you can integrate both of them, when you should go which route. And we also cross-post all of our content direct to dev.to/Nrwl or dev.to/NX, depending on which one we target. Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone, for... Yeah, sure.
Can I add one more thing? So if you, final words, if you are an open source project maintainer, you have a popular open source project, and you just want to update to the newest Lerna, enable caching, maybe enable distribution, enable GitHub integration, etc. Do all of those cool things, right? And you're kind of not sure, right? Just ping us, and we will help you out, right? Because I think for us it's important to see, like does it work well for everyone? Are there any edge cases we didn't think through, etc. So reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out, right? We're always happy to, like, we have folks. We are friends with many open source project teams, right? We have shared Slack channels, right? And we help each other out. So in this case, we help some folks right now to enable Lerna and see, like, do they like it? Do they see the advantages of caching, etc. Right? So just ping us, right, on Twitter or like in community Slack. Just say, hey, I'm maintaining this big project. Help me someone, right? And we'll set up a shared Slack channel and we'll help you out.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And you'll find all those links once the show is over, also in our show notes, so you can follow up from there. Cool. Thanks, everyone, for being on and chatting with me with Lerna. See you next time.